Vincent van Gogh painted what he saw around him. Ordinary people, ordinary things, ordinary scenes. He revealed the extraordinary in the ordinary. Every day he went out into the world and painted the everyday. The railway was certainly part of Van Gogh's everyday world. He lived in the railway age, in a Europe in which rail networks were extensive, and railways were an essential part of economic, social, and cultural life. He travelled by train all the time, in his native Netherlands and in Belgium, France, and England. His letters are full of references to railway journeys, railway timetables, meetings at railway stations, and railways feature often in his art. He was aware from an early date of the visual qualities of the railway. In 1876, while in England, he described seeing a train passing along an embankment in Acton Green, west of London. At that moment, a train came, and that was a beautiful sight, the red glow of the locomotive and the rows of lights inside the carriages in the twilight. In his awareness of the aesthetic potential of the railway, he was not alone. 19th-century artists had often depicted the railway, and during Van Gogh's lifetime it was a popular subject among the Impressionists and Post-Impressionists, with Claude Monet, Camille Pissarro, Paul Cézanne, and Gustave Caillebotte among the notable artists depicting railway themes and railway landscapes. Unlike those artists, however, Van Gogh had a particular sensitivity to industrial settings, buildings, and machinery, and had always drawn and painted them as readily as he had village scenes and rural landscapes. This watercolour of a coking plant in the Borinage, a coal-mining region of southern Belgium where Van Gogh spent some time working as a missionary pastor, shows the structure's place in the landscape and the details of its construction and operation, with its grimy brick buildings, smoking chimneys, a looming spoil heap on the right topped with an aerial ropeway, and, behind it, the headstock of a distant pit. And here is a drawing which Van Gogh made in The Hague of a very workaday subject, but also an iconic site of modern urban industry, a gasworks. Beyond its dark looming forms, a windmill can be seen on the right, with light glinting on its sails, bearing witness to an earlier era of Dutch mechanization. In this drawing of a weaver with his loom from 1884, Van Gogh pays careful attention to the construction and working of the machine, but also to its relationship to the weaver operating it, who is entirely encased, almost imprisoned within his loom, so that the drawing seems to be asking us the question, is the man or the machine the master? This image expresses Van Gogh's social conscience, which is constantly present in his art. Technologies, as with the landscape or with buildings, are not represented as isolated or treated just as problems of aesthetics, but are presented as objects in the real world, embedded in social and economic relations. When Van Gogh comes to depict the railway, it is not with the rhetoric of speed, power, or technological triumphalism, nor as a neutral subject of artistic representation, but as something that affected the lives of ordinary people. He cared about that, as he cared about everything and everybody that he painted. Thus, in this watercolour sketch, one of many of working-class life made by Van Gogh in 1882 while he was living in The Hague, he shows the gloomy interior of a third-class railway waiting room, where men and women wait for their train. Each figure is deftly modelled with a few strokes of the brush, but is also given dignity and individuality. The old man with his pipe, the two women, one with a child, talking, and the man and woman who sit in self-contained patience on the left, she in crisp white linen and dark wool, he in cap and boots. In this drawing, done in The Hague in March 1882, Van Gogh carefully delineates the great arched roof of the train shed at the station, its iron tracery echoing the bare branches of the trees in the foreground and the reflections in the glassy surface of the cold, still canal. The huge curved roofs recede to the right, dissolving into a dark mass. The railway's presence in this image is dominant and sinister, a huge mechanism of iron and steam that broods over the landscape, with people, like those we saw in the preceding image, as the raw material it draws in and consumes. In this picture of black ironwork and black trees against a cold, pale sky, Van Gogh conveys not only the appearance but the atmosphere of a bleak spring day. He constantly sought to express feelings and sensations in his pictures, and to draw the viewer in to share them. In July 1882 he wrote about this in a letter to his brother Theo, in which he describes his work on this watercolour, Pollard Willow. "I've attacked that old giant of a pollard willow, and I believe it has turned out the best of the watercolours. A sombre landscape, that dead tree beside a stagnant pond covered in duckweed, in the distance a Rheinspoor depot where railway lines cross, smoke-blackened buildings, also green meadows, a cinder road, and a sky in which the clouds are racing, grey with an occasional gleaming white edge, and a depth of blue where the clouds tear apart for a moment. In short, I wanted to make it like how I imagine the signalman with his smock and red flag must see and feel it when he thinks, 'How gloomy it is today.' Here is that railway worker, red flag in hand, standing beside the tracks. A dark, rain-burdened sky broods over the flat land, with the brown and grey railway buildings providing a sombre backdrop to the other figure in the picture, a labourer splashing along the puddled path. Standing behind him, like sentinels, are the twin forms of a railway locomotive on the left, with its smoke filtering upwards, and a windmill on the right, with its sails reaching upwards, representing two forms of technology, one new and one old, but both possessing the power to reshape the land. In the foreground, the willow stretches its twisted trunk out over the water, and raises its stunted branches skywards, as if imploring or pleading. Van Gogh accompanies his account of the painting with a sketch in ink and wash, which makes the scene darker and more gloomy, and in which the glowering character of the station is even more marked. Another watercolour of the same station from January 1882 gives a closer view of the jumble of roofs, chimneys, and ventilators that make up the building's skyline, contrasting with the simple lines of railway, canal banks, road, and horizon, the regular ranks of poplars, and the straight boundaries of fields that characterize the rest of the landscape. Alignments such as these, lines of communication and division, would assume more and more importance in Van Gogh's landscapes in the next few years. In 1886, Van Gogh came to Paris, where he stayed for about 2 years. His Parisian period was crucial for his artistic development, as, for the first time, he was able to study contemporary art in detail, and was exposed to new influences, including pointillism and symbolism. His palette lightened, and his technique loosened, as the dark tones and smoothly blended brushwork he had learned from the old Dutch masters gave way to the brightness of the contemporary Impressionists. He was not initially impressed by Impressionism, but during 1886–7 he responded to the challenge of the new style. His brushstrokes evolved into patterns of short streaks, dabs, and dashes. His colours became brighter, his forms more defined. The change can clearly be seen in a comparison of this early view over Paris from the summer of 1886 with this view of a corner of Montmartre painted in spring 1887. In Asnières, on the banks of the Seine, northwest of Paris, a favourite resort of the Impressionists and Post-Impressionists, Van Gogh painted many scenes, including at this location, where two bridges, one a railway bridge and the other a road bridge, created an exciting interplay of forms. Van Gogh's friend, Émile Bernard, drew his attention to the scene, and the two painted there at more or less the same time. A comparison of the two scenes highlights the way in which Van Gogh's artistic approach was developing. He explores the details of the scene, the construction of the bridges, and the details of the locomotive and the vehicles that make up the train, things to which Bernard, with his flattened and simplified forms, pays only the most cursory attention. Yet what catches the eye in Van Gogh's painting is the dazzling interplay of brushstrokes and colour, and his distortion of perspective, giving extra emphasis to the railway as a channel of movement to and from the city. The fact that, in Bernard's painting, the train has gone by and is disappearing out of the picture, whereas Van Gogh's train is entering from the left, gives Van Gogh's depiction an extra level of dynamism and power. Van Gogh retained his interest in depicting the railway when he moved on from Paris to the south of France. Arles was an important railway centre, and Van Gogh's views in and around the town depict the railway several times. He lived in the yellow house on the corner in this painting. Behind the house, on the right, can be seen not just one, but two railway bridges, the nearer with a train crossing it, trailing its banner of smoke, while people in the street stop to watch it go by. That was a depiction of the railway in an urban setting, while this painting from Arles has a more rural character. In some ways it is almost a pendant to, or echo of, his view of the bridge at Asnières, although without the dynamic diagonals and low viewpoint. This picture again shows a train on a bridge, but here it is parallel to the picture plane, and situated among trees, which seem to dominate the view, breaking the train into vertical strips of blue, which are echoed by the shadows in the foreground. Post-Impressionism followed Impressionism in its preoccupation with capturing fleeting moments, and the passage of the train through the landscape is essentially fleeting, as it passes beyond the trees and across the bridge, soon to be gone, leaving only steam and smoke behind it. The train is a symbol of transience. Railway views, and views including railway lines and infrastructure, were also essentially modern, landscapes of change and transformation, separating the landscapes of Impressionism and Post-Impressionism from previous schools of landscape painting that emphasized changelessness and continuity, and placed nature at the heart of landscape, rather than the works of humanity. Van Gogh, by contrast, is representing man and nature in dialogue, shaping each other, with human networks of connection and communication always evident. In this drawing from 1888, Van Gogh shows the view across the Rhône Valley, a landscape scattered with buildings and crisscrossed by walls, roads, and the railway line bisecting the image. Two modes of transport are prominent, the train running on the railway, and a carriage being driven along the road. Road and rail run parallel, but the train and the road vehicle are travelling in different directions. Perhaps the implication is that the train is hurrying into the future, while the carriage slowly moves into the past. Van Gogh treated this theme again in this painting from 1890, after he had returned north to Auvers near Paris. Again, the train and the carriage are moving parallel but in opposite directions, through a landscape seamed with lines of cultivation and of division, but also of communication. At the time when Van Gogh was painting this picture, he wrote in a letter to his sister, "Lately, I've been working a lot and quickly. By doing so, I'm trying to express the desperately swift passage of things in modern life." The rapid motion of the train through the landscape, a modern mode of transport contrasted with the slow-moving carriage on the road nearby, expresses in the stream of curling white vapour it leaves behind it, and the spiralling blurs of its wheels, that desperately swift passage of things that the artist describes. The brush-strokes that build up the fields, the roofs of the houses and the forms of the trees are largely orientated towards the vertical, while the train is a horizontal form, cutting dramatically across the landscape, separating the distant blue hills from the fields and farms in the foreground. The train running through this canvas was to be Vincent van Gogh's last. Within a month of painting it, he was dead. 8 years earlier, in a letter to his friend and mentor, the artist Anton von Rappard, Van Gogh had written of trains and travel, heaven and earth, and life and death. The sight of the stars always makes me dream in as simple a way as the black spots on the map representing towns and villages make me dream. Why, I say to myself, should the spots of light in the firmament be less accessible to us than the black spots on the map of France? Just as we take the train to go to Tarascon or Rouen, we take death to go to a star. What's certainly true in this argument is that while alive, we cannot go to a star, any more than once dead, we'd be able to take the train. So it seems to me not impossible that cholera, the stone, consumption, cancer are celestial means of locomotion, just as steamboats, omnibuses, and the railway are terrestrial ones. To die peacefully of old age would be to go there on foot.